So here at the Government 2.0 Expo with Dan Zarrella, a social media scientist from Hubspot. Hi, Dan.
How are you?
So you're coming off of a pretty successful discussion. You offered some tactical and strategic ways that people working in government can communicate better with people using social media. What are some of the strategies or tips you'd offer for someone in that role trying to get information to spread as broadly as it can?
So one of the things that I talked about that I think resonated really well with the audience, especially when you're talking about sort of getting people behind causes and motivating around crises and things like that, is that when you look at stories in aggregate on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, positivity actually tends to do better than negativity. Right, so in the case of Haiti, for instance, there was clearly a lot of negativity. There was no scarcity of negative stories, but when that message became more positive and became more hopeful and more, that you could do something about the problem, that's when it really started to catch on. And so, even taking a negative situation and kind of spinning it towards the positive, spinning it towards hope, spinning it towards something somebody can actually do to make something better, I think works really well. Another thing that I think I found that works very well is that when you talk about more traditional marketing or marketing of any sort, calls to action are really super important. You have to tell people exactly in as discreet as terms as possible exactly what you want them or need them to do. So with social media, maybe it's donate, but for the most part it's share is what you want people to do. And so if you actually ask for, say, please retweet, or please share this on Facebook with your friends, or please do this, please do that, please follow this account. That stuff works, and I would use that with caution. I mean, don't clearly say please retweet every tweet you make, but if you ask people to retweet good stuff, you ask people to do exactly what you need them to do, most people are very happy to help you do that.
And what are some of the ways you can construct tweets or information on Facebook that makes it easier for people to share, including that call to action?
Yeah, so on Twitter, because there's a 140 character limit, usually with the old style retweet, you need to keep it under, say, 100 characters, 120 characters, something like that, so people can add the RT, say, at Dan Zarrella or whatever, to the beginning of it. With the new version of retweets, that's not as important. On Facebook, what I found is that if you look at the readability, the grade level required to understand an article, for instance, the higher that gets, so the more complex or the more education required to understand a story, the less it gets shared on Facebook. That effect isn't as powerful on Twitter, because Twitter's, at this point, still mostly a lot of social media dorks and very tech-savvy people and marketing people and stuff. But Facebook is a much more mainstream audience. And so you have to speak simply, and you have to speak very clearly. And then I've actually found that on Facebook, adjectives and adverbs tend to be, very flowery language isn't shared as much as very direct, nouns and verbs kind of language. So a great book to pick up if you're interested in writing like that is Strunk and White, the classic Elements of Style book.
So that's solid here. So keep it short, keep it to the point, be direct, move away from flowery adjectives, allow room for people to pass it on, include a strong call to action. Now, one of the issues when you get into these spaces is brevity demands that you have to shorten the links that you put in there. What kind of strategy do you offer around which to share and how to do it?
So coming from the private sector, I've done some studies of how retweetable various URL shorteners are. Bitly tends to be not only just the most popular one, but even when you control for popularity, the most retweetable one, mostly because it's shorter. So with Twitter, there's like pre-Twitter URL shorteners and post-Twitter URL shorteners. So there's like TinyURL, which existed before Twitter, and it's actually sort of long. TinyURL.com is really, really long, but Bitly is actually only 5 characters plus the signifier for what link. I've heard a little bit about this .gov URL shortener.
Go.usa.gov.
Go.usa.gov, that's awesome. I think the .gov extension, very similar to the .edu extension, is huge for inspiring trust and for making people believe that the information behind presented is authentic and credible. And that I haven't done any studies about it, but my gut tells me that is going to be absolutely enormous. I think that's very cool.
So this issue of trust, authenticity in social media and government is bedrock in terms of understanding who it's coming from and how much you can trust it. What are some of the ways that you talk about or think about improving profiles on these networks to make sure that people can see who's on them and what tactical strategy tips do you have there?
So one thing that I've studied, so on Twitter you have a profile. You have a bunch of things you can fill out when you set up a Twitter profile. So accounts that have an avatar or have an image set tend to have a lot more followers because they tend to be much more present.
10 times more followers?
I forget the number, but it's something huge like that. Yeah. You can also put a link in your Twitter profile. Accounts, again, something like 10 times more followers if you have a link in there. And again, most Twitter accounts actually don't have links, images, or bios set because most Twitter accounts are just 10 followers and they're not doing much with it. And then there's a 160-character bio field you can put in your profile when you set it up. And accounts have one of those set up, have a lot more followers too. But then when you actually look at the words contained in that bio, things like official or founder or expert or author or whatever tend to have a lot more followers than the more diminutive terms like boy or girl or nerd or whatever, right? So identify who you are and why people should listen to you, and fully set up your profiles. And then another thing, and I think a slightly more subtle, but a little bit more powerful almost, method for inspiring credibility, both on Twitter, on Facebook, or even just on a blog post, is this idea of social proof. So the more a human sees other people taking an action, the more correct they believe it is. So if you have 100 followers, I'm more likely to believe somebody with 10,000 followers or 20,000 followers. If your article has been retweeted 5 times, I'm more likely to believe an article that's been retweeted 500 times, or a blog that has 10,000 RSS subscribers, or a Facebook page that's been liked 30,000 times, or whatever it is. So take whatever elements of social proof you have and really amplify those and show those off.
So last question. Which government social media accounts do you think are being run well, and why?
I'm not sure there's a whole lot of examples. I think I think obviously Barack Obama's his campaigning account was pretty good. I think honestly he could have done more. What I did like about it, I think when you compare it especially to the other candidates, is that he was following a lot of people as well. So again, in the private sector, a lot of times I'd recommend that you don't follow as many people as are following you. But in the public sector, you definitely want to appear and you want to be open to two-way conversation, and following a lot of people back is really key. I think coming from Boston, I think the Mass.dot guys are doing some awesome stuff on Twitter and on with open data and things like that in general as well.
Okay, so that's at Barack Obama, which most people already know, and if you don't know the DOT, it's at MassDOT on Twitter. And we've been talking with Dan Zarrella, a social media scientist from Hubspot, which is a Boston-based internet marketing firm. And you can find him at Dan Zarrella. That's Zarella.
2 R's.
2 R's on Twitter. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.